Good Tuesday morning, and welcome to the Volquest podcast presented by Exterior Home Solutions, local trusted since 1999. Exterior Home Solutions, 865-524-5888. With Austin Price, Rob Lewis, and Brent Hubbs, I am Eric Kane. Again, this is the Volquest podcast. A lot to get into here today. It's been a busy news week the last couple of days to begin this new week. And let's go ahead and start with the most recent of which, and that is George McIntyre, the class of 2025 quarterback, has committed to the University of Tennessee. And AP, this is one where you've not swayed the entire time, even well before Nick Saban's retirement. George McIntyre is a Vol.
Yeah, and again, credit Josh Heupel. You know, he did a fantastic job of winning George over early. I thought Joey Halsley did a really fantastic job as that recruitment went on. And, I mean, you saw George's video. That's not something that he put together, once, Nick Saban retired. I mean, like the kid grew up wearing Tennessee clothes. His mom, you see her there. She is so proud to see her baby put on that power tee. And, she's excited. Matt's excited. The whole family's excited. There was like 50 McIntyres there in the gym on Monday. I was like blown away by the amount of family that was on hand, and just an exciting time for that family. But really credit Josh Heupel. He's the one that kind of sold George on the vision early, and George said it to me before we ever taped the interview. Like, I could be living in another state, and playing for Josh Heupel is just something I wanted to do.
AP, I think it's interesting. I think one thing, too, that where Josh Heupel and Tennessee staff deserve some credit here is they didn't kind of waver on who they liked in this quarterback class, right? I mean, I think the fact that it wasn't just that they developed a great relationship with George, it's the fact that George was the priority for Tennessee at the quarterback position. When they did their evals back in the spring and last fall, that's the direction they went. And they pushed all the chips in for George. I mean, I'm not saying they couldn't have gotten somebody else down the road if George didn't want to come. But, I mean, the fact that they've said, listen, George McIntyre is our number one guy, and they made that commitment to him, I think that resonated as well, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. I know that, there was a lot of talk about Deuce at one point or another, but Deuce was never number one. George was always number one. But you had to play it a certain way if you're Tennessee, because if you didn't get George and, all of a sudden you just totally punted on Deuce at the time, and then you were in a tough spot. So, they recruited both hard, Madden as well. But at the end of the day, it was always George McIntyre. The kid's got a seed for an arm. He's got to put on weight. He knows that's where he has to be better, right? Like, I think there's going to be a real conscious effort to find a way to add weight this offseason. And George has got this huge frame to him. If he adds the weight, then watch out, because he can throw it from different arm angles. He can throw it well on the run. He improvises well. He's got a very cerebral football mind about him. And again, this kid, just has a certain it factor with recruits. You saw it, Matt's reaction piece, since he committed. And you're talking about Jamie French. You're talking about Caleb Cunningham, both guys talking glowingly about George. You have Marcus Harris telling Chad Simmons that he and George have been talking about teaming up for a while. We talked about this the last few weeks. Nico was massive for the program, but as far as like pure recruiting other kids in his class, I think George has a chance to have a greater impact, only because George lives in the footprint, knows kids more readily available to Tennessee in the footprint of Tennessee football recruiting. Tennessee's only going to be able to recruit so many kids out of the state of California, which is where Nico had most of his reach. George's reach is Atlanta, is Alabama, is even Florida, North Carolina with a David Sanders. There's a certain charisma to George, even though like he's a reserved kid, a quiet kid. I don't think he is around other kids his age, and I think that's something that people resonate towards.
Yeah, and you look at the potential there and talk about some of that in-state recruiting. Hubs has a story up on the site right now where Darius Jackson, of course, Ethan Utley, Cameron Sparks, Joe Kim Dotson. I mean, there's a number of prospects in the state that could really benefit from a guy like George McIntyre. And Rob, this is something that I've written here recently, and there's a clear path. And Hubs mentioned this a moment ago. Last year in the cycle, it was such a great quarterback cycle in 2023. Tennessee sought out. They said, hey, Nico is our guy. We want Nico. We're going to go get Nico. And Nico jumped in the boat in early March. during that recruiting cycle. Merklinger as well. He was the guy that, Tennessee wanted. Tennessee went out and got Merklinger. And now this year, it's George McIntyre. McIntyre is now in the boat, getting commitments from your quarterback early in the cycle to build around. It's kind of a staple so far in the early tender, Rob, of Josh Heupel.
And it's a staple of top programs, around college football.
Yep.
And that's, the blueprint for how Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, and those guys, they've not been waiting on, kids in the, summer before their senior years. They've been, many times recruiting, the same small target group. And AP touched on it, but I don't think you can overstate it for Tennessee. Hubbard, you've been doing this a long time, and he's the best quarterback prospect in the state. And it's probably not close, I guess. And that says something interesting about, high school football in the state, but still for this level of prospect to be in your state, for it to be at this time in Josh Heupel's tenure here, going into year 4, when you've done some good things, you clearly elevated the program. You really had to nail that one down. You're an offensive coach, you're a quarterback, guru. The ties he had to Tennessee himself. So, it wasn't, I'm not saying, if Josh hadn't landed him, he couldn't get it done here. But it was a big, big deal to land that kid out of the mid-state from that high school program that has produced so many guys, and the position. I think there were a lot of reasons. Obviously the level that George can play football at is the biggest, but there are a lot of kind of aesthetics here that are really big for Tennessee football.
And here, AP, finally the cycle fits and it hits right for Tennessee, right? 3 years ago, we talked about how that class was the best class we've seen in the state of Tennessee, and it had Ty Simpson, and it had Dallin Hayden, and it had Walter Nolan, and it had players, and I'm forgetting many of them. I may have got some of my years confused, but that was a really good class. But the timing was bad for Tennessee, right? Josh Heupel had just gotten on the job. They had the NCAA cloud over their head. This class, this in-state class, has got a chance to be pretty special when you look at the talent, and it's headlined by George McIntyre. And it's going to hit the right way because Tennessee has a brand. They have an identity. They're established. Josh Heupel's established himself. They've worked relationships in the state of Tennessee. It feels like this one's got a chance. What Josh Heupel mentioned in his press conference when you asked him about it in December, he made it clear how important the state of Tennessee in the class of 25 was. Things are set up for Tennessee in state. This was the first piece. I think the question now is how many dominoes can they get to go with it?
AP, you look at this committed class of 2025 right now, of course, just the beginning, long way to go. We mentioned some of the names that, could be, big time targets now with George in the boat. But so far this class, what do you like about Tennessee's 2025 recruiting class?
Well, I love you got a quarterback tight end combination that have already kind of become buddies. Let's peel back the onion a little bit. So, George is in town Saturday. So is Jack Van Doorslayer, and there is a space. I want to go ahead and reemphasize that there's a space between Van and Doorslayer. So it's not one big word; it's 2 words, because that's something that we kind of found out over the weekend. But with Jack, his family is in Knoxville. He has family members here. And so, of course, does George. So, George goes with Jack the other night to hang out. And, his dad, Matt, says, "Hey, I'll come get you. Let me know when, you're ready to be picked up." George says, "Hey, man, I'm ready to be picked up." And he sends the location. Jack's family was 4 doors down from where Matt and them were. And they had no clue that they literally were just down the street. So, there's already a natural bond there between quarterback and tight end that I think really helps. And so with Van Doorslayer, with McIntyre, that's a nice start to the offensive side of the ball. You've obviously got a tailback committed, out of the state of Georgia, which I think is massive. I like the start to this class. They've got a couple of those DBs from Milton that are doing, some really good things. So I really like the start to this class. You have a natural ties with Cam Sparks and Rodarius Jackson on the same 7-on-7 team with George McIntyre. Those are going to be easy targets for George to go try to recruit. Then you add those big names that we talked about. French, big-time kid, once committed to Alabama, available now. Cunningham out of the state of Mississippi, same type thing. And then the linemen, Juan Gaston, David Sanders, Josh Petty. Now, these are all players that Tennessee will be swinging big for. They're not going to land them all, but can they land their share of that big group of top players? So, I think it's going to be interesting to see. I think the potential is there for Tennessee to have a big class in 25 because you started with such a high-profile quarterback. Now let's see what they can do and build around it.
Do have a question here, AP? Feel free to jump in on it, but Brent, let me kind of tailor this towards you. There were still some high-profile juniors who were in town this past weekend because of flights and everything, but the overall day kind of got canceled. So there was a ton of guys who did not make it into town because of the weather and the roads and all that. How much will that maybe put Tennessee back? I don't think it's going to be anything detriment, but it is one of those times where a lot of guys can come up and see campus for the first time ever, then try to get them back on for spring practice and all that. How big of a loss was Saturday in the grand scheme of things with some of these other names we haven't really mentioned yet?
Well, I mean, Austin's going to be able to chime in on this better than I am. I think there's two things that jump out. One, if you never get them back here and they were scheduled to be here, it's obviously a big loss. If you can get them back here, then it actually isn't that big of a deal because you had a small number of guys who got to spend a lot of time with your coaches and a little bit more of a one-on-one kind of intimate setting instead of a little bit of a cattle herding with a big volume of guys here. Encouraging thing, Austin, is it sounds like the Sanders kid from North Carolina may be back here in a couple weeks, could be back first part of February, which that one's important for Tennessee if they can get him back here. But I don't feel like it was just end of the world bad unless you just have a bunch of kids who don't come back. I don't think anybody was on the cusp of committing somewhere else and you were trying to stave that off. Maybe one guy or two, but I don't know that it was as as maybe you first thought it could be, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's a big deal. I think ultimately, yeah, you'd love to have had a full group, but I do think Brent brings up a great point that with the kids you did have here, the kids from Texas, the Gilroy kid, who's a really nice looking corner from the state of Texas, Tennessee offered this weekend. And then you look at the two kids from Mater Dei, both Dixon and Harris, they get a lot of one-on-one time with the staff. And they were surrounded by George, who obviously is the quarterback in the bell cow, and he's making his pitch. You're also, surrounded by Van Doorslayer, who, again, is committed, and he's going to be, doing his thing. So for my liking, I thought it was great that it wasn't huge, but you still were able to have a little bit of something, right? It wasn't a total loss. We'll see if David Sanders makes it here February 3rd. If he doesn't, I do know he'll be back up here the first part of March. That's very important to him. Clemson, Georgia, Tennessee, kind of, to me, the top three right now. Everybody's recruiting David Sanders. Everybody wants David Sanders. I'm just telling you the teams that I think you're going to see him visit in the coming, between 2 and 8 weeks from now. Those three, I think, will definitely get visits. And, again, I think it's a little bit of a loss, but I don't think, as Hub said, there's really nobody that you were trying to stave off from committing elsewhere. And if you can get most of them back up here February 3rd, it doesn't really matter.
As a follow-up to that, AP, do you think it helped with Jackson Moy that there wasn't as many here? Did he get more time on an official visit as a transfer because you didn't have a bunch of other defensive linemen here? Or do you think it was separate and it's not a big deal either way?
That's a good point. I do think it would have been natural for him, to not see the coaches as much if you'd had, 40 kids here, including, 6 or 8 more defensive linemen. But he got all of the attention from Rodney, from Chop, from, Banks, from everybody, from Coach Heupel. And so I do think that was big. I thought the addition of I don't know, we're going to talk about both he and Hurd. Obviously, it's big for 24. But to me, it's even bigger for 25 because in 25, you're going to have guys that come off the books regardless. They're getting kicked out of the house when they turn 18 regardless, right? Like there's no more eligibility left.
All right, we're going to get to those two guys here in just a moment. Lance Hurd commits to Tennessee. Jackson Moy commits to Tennessee. Tennessee basketball on a roll, taking down Alabama on a Saturday night in Tennessee. All that and more coming up next. But first, a quick word from our friends over at Exterior Home Solutions.
It's one of those phone calls that you hate to get from your kids. Hey, Dad, a tree fell on my house. Well, we got that call a couple of weeks back from our daughter at her house here, and the first call that I made was to Exterior Home Solutions. The peace of mind that they gave me and us as a family when they came out here and came up with a plan, got us connected with the right people, is absolutely priceless. Use the same people that I use. In that time of need, Exterior Home Solutions.
865-524-5888, exteriorhomesolutions.com. As always, we appreciate them for their partnership here on the Volquest podcast. We kind of mentioned them there before we went to break, and that is Jackson Moy, former defensive lineman from Stanford, was planning to be in Washington. Of course, that coaching staff got uprooted, comes to Tennessee, visits, commits on Sunday. Huge news for Tennessee because, again, like you mentioned, AP, you've got Amari Thomas, you got Bryson Easton, you got Norman Lott, you've got Elijah Simmons. You got all these interior guys who are going to be gone after next year, but you got a guy that's got multiple years and a pretty productive player so far throughout his collegiate tenure. A nice addition via the portal for Tennessee.
Yeah, and again, I think those Polynesian interior linemen are something that you really like. Tennessee obviously had success with Jesse Mahalona, a former All-American. JT Milpoo is a really good player, and solid player here. And now you're adding another piece. Now, as far as this current team, you're going to add Moy to Keenan Peely and Nico Iamaleava as Polynesians on the roster. Moy originally from San Diego, just a good-looking kid, probably a little bit taller version of Jesse Mahalona, maybe not as thick, Hubbard, but still really a nice piece to the puzzle. And again, I'll continue to reiterate, huge for 2025. Not that he won't help out this year, because he will, but a year from now, I think that's where the bread really gets buttered.
Well, I mean, because look, you're going to be in the portal probably this next winter in that cycle for some interior defensive line help. This takes a little pressure off of that. When you look at where you are, you feel like you like Hobbs where you are there. Moy, if you can get a Nathan Robinson to develop, where's Weathersby, right? Where does a Jason Jenkins, some different guys like that? What do they look like? Right now it looks good because you got like 16 bodies. You start adding up defensive linemen. Rob, you got a laundry list of guys who play snaps, who are going to be in a rotation, but a lot of those guys inside and outside aren't going to be here next year. So to bring in a guy that you believe you can count on to be a big factor for you in 25, and he already understands what you are doing and what you're about is a nice get for Tennessee to help themselves with a little bit of a footprint for 25.
I think it's hard to overstate. I mean, AP's been talking about it for weeks now. I mean, ever since these guys started, putting out on social media they were coming back that, hey, that's great for next year, but what does 25 look like? And you're right. I mean, it's kind of the best of both worlds. I mean, you get a guy who's already played, at a high level in college football, knows what it's about to be inside that program, and has also, got some extended time to be a part of your program because he's transferred in so early. So I think it's a huge get. You talk about a lot of bodies. I know a lot of them are older, and it's kind of top weighted towards, the veterans, the upperclassmen. But I mean, I think that's a sign of a healthy program when you start getting a lot of bodies on both lines of scrimmage, and some guy, 4 or 5 guys that you can't even name because. Or that don't pop into your head because, they're redshirt freshmen and nobody's expecting anything, but they end up, being pieces of the puzzle, being part of the 2 deep. And I think, I wouldn't say Tennessee's all the way there yet, but, having that many guys in the room, they're getting close.
Yeah. And I think too, Eric, when you're going portal shopping, unless the guy's elite, and I mean elite, right? Like we're talking, a Pearson to portal or a Caleb Downs or somebody like that. I think you're leaning towards a guy with multiple years of eligibility if you can go that route. I think Tennessee's done a fabulous job in the portal getting guys with multiple years. I think there's such an advantage to that. And I think that adds to what Rob's talking about with the healthiness. You're not having to go get a bunch of stopgap guys. You're getting guys that have multiple years that you can continue to develop in your culture. And I think that's the way you got to look at the transfer portal, unless the guy's going to get his name called by the commissioner on the first night of the draft, right?
I thought you were going to get a full scout from Justin Wilcox about him, Hubs. He at least owes you that after he choked away that game to Auburn early in the year. It cost you the picks on the Ball with the Beast podcast.
It did. I'm still over the fact that his field goal kicker couldn't beat Auburn, but I do think it's a valid point, right, Eric? I mean, getting multiple year guys is I think that's the way you want to lean in the portal if you can. Now, in hoops, if you can get a guy like Dalton Knecht, who's going to be a lottery pick, okay, yeah, that makes sense, right? Are you going to get a guy who the commissioner is going to give him a hat and give him a bro hug on the stage on Thursday night? You take that guy every time. But if it's not that kind of guy, instead of just getting a 1-year player like that, get a guy with multiple years, because there's going to be more value in that in the transfer portal.
For sure. And you've seen over the course of the last couple of cycles with Josh Heupel, they've addressed certain needs where they just had to have a guy for sure. Look at, tight end, this go around. Holden Stays has got a couple of years of eligibility, which works out. But last year, you go out and get a guy, McCallum Castles, you had to have a guy. And so it worked out well. He was super productive, and he was going to come in and play whatever, but you had to have a guy. That first couple of cycles, even Keenan Peely last year, it turns out he's going to play another year, but you needed a guy, a linebacker. First couple offseason with the transfer portal, when you were just trying to build your roster, you wanted multi-year guys, but a lot of times you didn't have that luxury. But now I think I couldn't agree more. Unless it's just an absolute stud, you want a guy that's got 2 or 3 years to kind of be in your roster, be in your culture and all that and more. And Tennessee's done a nice job with that. McCoy, Jacoby Thomas, I believe, has 2 years. Mitchin Stays, Lance Hurd, who we're going to speak on in a moment, and the list goes on. Tennessee's done a really, really nice job of doing that this transfer portal cycle. So go ahead, Rob.
I was just saying, AP or Hubbard, what do you guys think? I'll tell you what I like about this staff and the portal. They don't panic sign guys, or it doesn't appear that they panic sign guys. I mean, we saw, and I know that can be hard when you're coming off and you feel like you just got to get help. You got to get help, but they haven't signed like a Keller Christ in this, somebody that just to grab and throw in the roster.
Andre London's.
Another good one, another blast from the past, AP. And I'm not picking on Pruitt and that staff. I mean, they came in and had a lot of holes to fill, but so did Josh. I mean, when he came in, and you've not seen him bring in a lot of dead weight via the transfer portal.
Well, let me ask you this: they did one time with the running back from Clemson, but he was here like 3 minutes.
And you could argue about Jawan Mitchell, but I don't know that was really a talent issue.
No,
yeah, I mean he's been through 4 or 5 teams, so that's not really a talent issue. Let me ask you this though, kind of going back to that first transfer portal cycle with this staff. Gavonte Pyton, was he a guy that they just needed a receiver? It turned out well. He scored 4 or 5 touchdowns for Tennessee, did a pretty good job in 1 year, had 18 receptions on the year. But was he one of those guys where it's just kind of like, all right, he's got a little bit of SEC experience, let's get him now? Because I think he would kind of fit that mold.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at where they were at the roster that first year, you had to go get 1-year guys. I mean, they took some 1-year guys that first year because they had to, because they had 30 guys leave. Okay. And when they came in, I mean, the portal was, I mean, they took a bunch of guys in the springtime as well, just because they were in a bad spot that way. I think again, when you're healthier and you're stable the way that you are, you want to try to get multi-year guys, unless it's a stud, because what you want to do is you want to get out of the cycle of signing, a portal guy at that position every year as a 1-year plug and play. Right. I mean, you don't want to put a bunch of position guys on 1-year tender sheets, basically, is what you're trying to avoid doing. I mean, and I think that's the important thing with the tight end position, right? You got Ethan Davis, who's got multi-years. You got Holden Stays. You brought in Cole Harrison, right? Now, all of a sudden, Austin, you're not sitting here looking at next December going, man, you got to have 2 tight ends or you're not even going to be able to line up and play the position, right? I mean, you got to get some depth created that way, and signing multi-year guys gives you that opportunity. And I think Tennessee can do that now. They couldn't do that in year 1.
Well, and they were able to also get the kid from Alabama, who, again, right now has 1 year. Could he win an appeal based off of playing 4 games and a postseason game in JUCO? Maybe. Like they give out more of those appeals now than they used to. But either way, like that room's kind of been rebuilt in the last 6 to 7 weeks. And then again, you add Van Doorslayer for 25, and you feel a little better about the tight end spot than you did last year and even the year before.
Yeah, and even if you don't win that appeal, which is very much up in the air right now, like I don't hate just getting that guy again as an example of just getting a body, because you took care of your need, a productive guy in Holden Stays, multiple years and all that. Him, Ethan Davis are going to go. You still slim pickings for 2024's roster at the tight end position, and you really just need another body, and
right.
He just kind of fits that.
Nice quarterback.
Let's move over now to Lance Hurd. Polls closed a while ago, but he officially makes his announcement on Sunday. Back to back with Jackson Moy and within the hour. Lance Hurd's going to be a huge addition both for 2024 and beyond. He will be a starting tackle barring injury. Formerly the highest rated recruit on LSU's signing class in 2023, a former 5-star Brent Hubbs. Huge get for Tennessee to pair with John Campbell. You got Dane Davis as well. Of course, Gerald Mincy's gone to the transfer portal, needing bodies, but also a guy that's got a tremendous upside, a little bit of experience, but tremendous upside in Lance Hurd.
Yeah, he played almost 200 snaps. Everybody's asked, why did he leave LSU? Well, there's 2 All-American tackles on that roster that, I don't think he wanted to set another year behind. And he wanted the opportunity to play and feels like he can play. I'm curious to get to know the guy. There's a part of me that loves the way he went about this whole transfer portal process, as maddening as it was at times. There's a part of me that kind of appreciates the fact that he didn't want to be it wasn't about being re-recruited. It wasn't about, a top 10 or a top 5 or, rehashing every visit and all those types of things. He's kind of wanted to show up and go play football. And I can respect that. It almost felt, AP, like the graphic on Sunday was almost a reluctant deal. It was just kind of like, I just want to show up and just, hey, I want to go to class. I want to go to the weight room and I want to go meet my teammates. I want to start working out and get ready to play. There's a part of me that kind of likes that mentality with transfer portal kids personally.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. He was at Tennessee for 7 minutes and Oklahoma for 12 minutes on 2 official visits. And I mean, like, the kid just had this whirlwind weekend. He spent more time in the air than he did,
On
campus, and, was done. Didn't take any more visits, was good. And it probably has been in the boat for a while, and it's just a matter of, again, getting to that point where you could put out a graphic. And again, like, I just don't think that was in him at all. Like, talk to him on the phone. Super nice kid. He's like, man, I'm not trying to put you off. I'm really not. I've got so many Zooms I'm on and applications to fill out and all this stuff, getting signed up for classes. He's like, he goes, we'll talk when I get up there. And I'm like, that's cool. Like, again, super nice. So, it just seemed like a super low key kid who, just wants to play football and wants to be a factor on the field.
And Rob, he's going to have to be a factor when you look at where Tennessee's at the tackle position. I mean, we talk about getting multiple year guys. That's great. You also need plug and plays. And this is a guy, everything about him says plug and play.
Oh, he's the best of both worlds. I mean, exactly. I mean, Tennessee did well last year with John Campbell. It looks like they might have even cranked it up a notch, this year with Hurd. I mean, a guy that literally everybody wanted. And, I thought that was a really nice pull. And that's stating the obvious, but with the kind of suitors that this guy had, I thought that made a pretty big statement about how Tennessee's program is viewed. I know NIL is a factor, but everybody recruiting that kid had an NIL package, to offer, and for Tennessee to land him at that position. I mean, Hubbard, how long have you been talking about, how big of a need that was? I mean, since well before the bowl game, and man, it's kind of like EC said a minute ago with McAllen Castles. I mean, this time, or in December last year, they had to go get a guy at that position. They looks like they hit a home run again with Hurd and kind of under the gun in a similar situation.
Still play on words there as well, because he will pull plenty and kick out in Tennessee's run scheme. But it kind of works out well too in this regard too, Rob, because Tennessee needs to find a starting left guard, and they'll look at that over spring and summer and in fall camp. But I mean, if you're healthy, you got John Campbell on the right, likely Lance Hurd on the left, but those are your 2 tackles. You got a guy like Dane Davis who has started and played in so many different games for Tennessee. He can be your swing. He might have a hand in the left guard position as well. He could probably slide in and play guard. But if everybody's healthy, you feel really good about your options now with those 2 and a swing guy in Dane Davis who's played an awful lot in this offense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes the left guard competition really interesting, because now all of a sudden, if you feel like you're good with those 2 at tackle, does Sham get a real hard look at guard? Is that a better fit for him than the tackle position? I think that's something now you can experiment a little bit with in spring practice as you try to figure out who your best 5 are. And you got some more bodies there to work with. And I think the other thing it does too is it takes if you stay healthy, it takes pressure off Bennett Warren, AP, who I think has got a chance to be a really good player at Tennessee. I like and seeing him in the Polynesian Bowl and looking at his frame, there's a lot to like there. What I don't like is that he's not a midterm enrollee.
Yeah.
Because, he's gonna miss the time in the weight room. You wonder what kind of shape he's going to arrive in. So now you can bring him about in the 24 season if you stay healthy and there's not a lot of pressure out of the gate for somebody to kind of just, throw them in there and survive if you have to. And I think that, it sets up well. It helps Tennessee set up better for 25 on the offensive line, which is obviously important for the growth of this offense.
Yeah, 1,000%. You look at Bennett Warren. I think he does have a lot of potential. He just got to get off some of that bad weight, and I think he knows that. Like when he gets in there and the nutritionist goes, "Here's our plan." Weight room guys go, "Here's our plan." I think he's going to trim it off, and I think he is way more like Orlando Brown than he is Gerard Shaw, right? Like, two big kids that one was going to go one direction, one was going to go the other. And I think that the sky's the limit for Bennett Warren. Again, it's just a matter of getting in there and getting some of the bad weight off of him. But, I mean, you can't teach size. You can't teach athleticism at his size. And both of those things he has.
Rob, did you have Gerard Shaw on your bingo card for a podcast reference today?
I did not. Hover. I did not have Jay Shaw make an appearance.
But I think that you're right. I mean, it's
a great analogy.
Yeah, and that's the challenge for Bennett Warren. And I think Bennett Warren's motivated, to be in a different way than Gerard Shaw was. And so I think, but again, there's not as much pressure on him moving forward, which I think is good because, listen, you can do all the things you're supposed to do at home, but not being here and being around it and understanding how it is different, but you're opening yourself up for some really good competition in spring practice, which I think is good for Tennessee.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I don't know what's happened over the course of college football. Obviously, I mean, more and more guys come in as mid-year guys now, but here in recent memory, I mean, Darnell Wright was not a mid-year guy, and he played a ton as a freshman on a bad offense. Cooper Mays was not a mid-year guy. He played a little jumbo tight end, and AP helped me. I think he started a game
Cooper
or two.
Cooper was a midterm guy.
Yeah. Cooper was a midterm.
I thought Catholic didn't allow them to come in.
No, he and Cade both were. Cade broke the mold, and then Cooper and Tyler Barron continued.
It's commonly referred to as the Mays rule down off Cedar Bluff these days because it did change that way. But to your point, and again, this goes back to where I think it's good that Tennessee's at. Some of those guys you mentioned, they had to play because they were in a situation in their program that, and I've said this before, they were handing out starting spots when they handed out pads. Mm-hmm. It happened when Juwan James was here, right? When you look at that young offensive line they had to throw out there that year, there was a handful of those guys who weren't physically ready, but they had to go play right out of the gate. And so what you want to do is you don't want to have to do that to Bennett Warren. I mean, Darnell Wright was not ready to play as a freshman. Nope. Didn't have a choice. That's where they were. He was the best option they had. The good news is because of what you have done in the portal here and having John Campbell stay, your option is not giving a starting job to a guy who's not ready when he arrives in the summertime. And that's the point I was trying to make.
I don't want to talk about this now because we're towards the end of it. I want to get into some hoops, but something we need to discuss, as the weeks progress, kind of on this conversation of where you are and how you want to attack the transfer portal, where your roster is, how much better now, and knowing that there's still holes, there's still questions, but how much better now is this roster than where it's been in the last, 4 or 5 years? There's been a lot of improvement, still not where it needs to be in terms of, the consistency and all that. And that comes with time and recruiting and all that and development, of course. But this roster, in my opinion, is much, much better now, obviously, than where it was 3-4 years ago. Rob, Dalton Knecht just continues, man. He's SEC Player of the Week, repeats there. He's the National Player of the Week. Tennessee rolls Alabama. Tennessee hoops looking good. Dalton Knecht playing like the All-American that he's going to be.
He's out of control, man. I mean, we've all talked about it. We said it. I mean, I knew the guy was going to be good, thought he was going to be good just based off how much chatter there had been, but I had no inclination that he was going to be this good. I don't think Rick Barnes did either. I'll just throw that out there. I think I think Coach definitely thought that he had a player. He had a player in his hand. I don't think that Coach necessarily thought he had the potential SEC Player of the Year. And you
didn't think they were going to sit down and watch Durant tape together to figure out how to attack defenses the way that they're going to guard you now, Dalton?
I don't think so. Again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Rick, did say that because I again, people inside the program were talking about, man, this guy's killing people in the gym, in June and July. I mean, nobody can guard this kid, but nobody was also saying, hey, this guy's going to put up bigger numbers than Grant Williams, or this guy's going to be, put up bigger numbers than Chris Lofton. So, not surprised he's a good player, blown away that he's, one of the best players in the country. I mean,
You didn't think he was going to be Ricky Rowe? You didn't think he was going to be Ricky Rowe?
I didn't think he was going to be this. And man, it's special. I mean, people need to appreciate it. I mean, it is really special what he's doing.
Nice reference to Blue Chips, a very underrated Nick Nolte performance.
There we go, Hover.
Rob, I do want to ask, because this gets asked in every color guy who's doing a game references this in the broadcast. Yeah, we talked to whoever the opposing coach is. It was Nate Oates, or it was her. Did you know about Dalton Knecht coming out of the transfer portal? And the response was, well, we knew who he was, but if we'd have known he was this, we were going to recruit him harder. Why did Tennessee find him? Not that they knew he was going to be this, but why did Tennessee, or how did Tennessee find him, and other people didn't seem to find him?
Well, I can't answer about other people. I mean, I just know that Tennessee, Rod Clark, assistant coach, was watching a former high school player that he had worked with that was playing against Northern Colorado and Knecht, and saw him, filed him away, and then didn't think anything about it until a couple months later, and he sees his name on the transfer portal list, and he's like, hey, I've seen this guy. He's a really good player. We need to look into it. And I don't know what Tennessee saw on tape that other people didn't, but it wasn't like he was unknown. I mean, I can't remember who the other. I know Indiana was one of the last ones in there, and I can't remember who else he looked at really hard. It all happened so fast, but I mean, Tennessee liked him, and I mean, he was a take immediately. I mean, it wasn't like let's see who's the kid, the Harvard kid that was here for a second. It wasn't like let's wait and see what Ledlam does, or wait and see what who's coming back. I mean, they liked Knecht immediately. I mean, they were aggressive and we're going to take him for the moment. But as to why other people is why North Carolina or Kentucky or who weren't on him in similar fashion, I don't know the answer to that. But in hindsight, it looks like a lot of people dropped the ball.
Rob, you've seen a lot of B-roll of him right there. Jordan Gainey, how important was it to see Jordan Gainey kind of break out of his slump, do what he did the other night against Alabama? What's that mean if he can give Tennessee something like that? I mean, he's not going to average that every single game, but how important was that for him and for Tennessee just to see that he could do it again?
I mean, I don't want to overstate it, but I think it's really big. I mean, you're talking about a kid that in 4 SEC games was 1 of 14 from the floor, and that's a slump. But also, I think that Jordan knew he was a good shooter. I mean, he made 49% from three 2 years ago as a freshman. So those kind of guys have confidence, but you still got to see the ball go in the basket. He had his minutes cut, as a result. So I think it was huge. I just think whether it's him or somebody else, Tennessee needs a little bit of offensive spark off the bench. And again, like you said, Eric, he's not going to go for 15 every night. But if he can be a guy that comes in and hits a couple of 3-pointers a night, I wrote this. I mean, that's with the way Knecht is playing, the way Ziegler's playing. If you can just get a little something from him, if you're Rick Barnes, it's like reaching your pocket and finding a $20 bill that you forgot about when you put in the dirty clothes. It's just a really nice little boost.
How much of adjustment do you think he's had to make, Rob? Because I mean, obviously, when he's playing at upstate, right? Like he's got the ball in his hand. I mean, it's all going through him all the time, right? I mean, how much of adjustment, not just to the speed and the physicality of the SEC, but just to the way he plays without the ball in his hand, or the way he has to play now, the way he's playing now compared to what he did when he was, the focal point of a team.
It's a tremendous adjustment. I mean, I congratulate him because, I mean, he went from being the best player on his team, I mean, a first-team all-conference player. I mean, 2 years ago, he led the NCAA in three-point accuracy. I mean, legit, right at 50% as a freshman over there. So, he's not having plays called for him anymore. I mean, we just talked. He had his minutes cut significantly, during December. So, I mean, he's gone from a guy that was having, probably plays called for him 8, 9, 10 times a half coming out of timeouts. And now he's, wondering if he's going to get that second rotation and a half. So he gets 8 minutes instead of 4. So I think mentally it's had to been a tremendous adjustment for him. And I also think that tells you a lot about the kid because, he, with his father, I can promise you, he knew exactly what he was getting into. He didn't think he was going to come in here and start or, play 25 minutes a game. He knew he was going to come in to be a role player, come off the bench. And I think that just shows you how much he wanted to play at this level, compete at this level, and measure himself against that. And Jordan has a great attitude. Don't get me wrong. He's not chafing and, thinking, I should be playing more. I mean, he's a great teammate. And, I think to your point, Hubbard, I think he's made a tremendous adjustment and knew what he was getting into.
Eric, can I ask one more?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that.
It's your website, man. You ask whatever you want.
No, it's not. I'm just along for the ride. But Rob, I mean, everybody talks about Knecht, right, and the transfer portal win and the win that it was, and how big of a difference that is. I don't know that everybody understands how big of a transfer portal win it was for Tennessee to get Jonas Adu back.
Mm-hmm.
You're
Because
exactly
that one
right
looked
about that.
that one looked like at one point he was out the door, right, Rob?
Well, I don't know that he was out. He had options. I mean, he had people call. I mean, he had people
Oxford.
reaching out to him aggressively, and he didn't want to leave, but he was, you know, I don't know all the details of the NIL space. I mean, he didn't want to leave. He just wanted something and he stayed at Tennessee for, in my understanding, a significantly lower package than what he could have gotten somewhere else.
Yep.
But, you know, because of the culture, because he loves his teammates, he likes his coaches, and he wants to win. And I'm, Hubbard, it's a big deal. I mean, Knecht's fantastic. He's fabulous. But, and I know, Britt, me and you have talked about it just between ourselves. Rick's not had a two-way big man like that in 9 years here. I mean, Kyle Alexander turned into a great defensive player, but he was never a guy that, you know, you called to play for, you know, coming out of halftime or coming, you know, the first play of the game. And man, I think it's hard to understate what Jonas has turned into, how much that helps his team when you've got a guy like Knecht. I mean, Knecht's guy is never going to be able to come off and double the post ever if they're on the same side of the court.
He's a rich man's Bill Cartwright, Rob Lewis. Rich man's Bill Cartwright.
I mean, just to have a legit low post guy like that with the way Dalton is playing on the perimeter right now, I mean, I think it makes Tennessee a really tough scout.
Out the door, Rob. No midweek game this week. So what are your midweek plans? And then early scout on Vanderbilt as Tennessee hits the road on Saturday.
Me and AP's got me catching up on some of those National Geographic documentaries on Disney. It's my assignment for Tuesday and Wednesday this week. Since
Okay.
It's a midweek day.
We expect a full report on the mailbag later in the week. Okay. All right. Can't wait for that. All right. A lot of good stuff here on the Volquest podcast. Appreciate you guys for
That
being
didn't
here.
go the way you thought it was going to go, Eric.
He didn't offer an awful lot. I thought he was going to continue on, but I guess not. He's ready to go.
AP's big on the Nat Geo documentaries.
We'll be there, Polynesian Bowl. Georgia McIntyre has agreed. We'll be there.
Brent Hubbs, Austin Price, Rob Lewis, I'm Eric Kane. As always, big thanks to Exterior Home Solutions, 865-524-5888, local and trusted since 1999. That is our friends, Exterior Home Solutions. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Volquest podcast. We'll be back later in the week for the Mailbag podcast. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, everybody.